This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through iZotope, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
And I thought really hard about, before we recorded, what is going to win. There's always a contest of who gets the sub-frequencies. It's either going to be the kick drum or it's going to be the bass. Mm-hmm. You can't fit both down there, at least not without them clashing. And this is true in pretty much any kind of music. So my decision was the bass lives down there. Because the kick drum, we don't need, thumping EDM, hip-hop, whatever kick. That's not what this is. The kick is a more detail-oriented instrument in jazz. So
the kick in pop music, the kick is sort of a danceable backbeat. In jazz, it can become more of an accent.
Yes,
from the whole kit, right?
Yeah,
like it might land.
It's just another drum. It's not serving the sort of dance beat disco purpose anymore.
Yeah,
it's just another part of a kit.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced iZotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Will Kennedy, a platinum-selling producer, mixer, and recording engineer whose credits include U2 on Songs of Experience, O.A.R. on All Sides and King, and OneRepublic's Oh My My. He's also known for his work on the 88's At Least It Was Here, the theme song from the hit TV series Community. In 2021, Will teamed up with longtime collaborator Matt Wallace to create Studio Delux Immersive, a cutting-edge mixing studio at the legendary Sound City Center in Los Angeles. Together, they've mixed close to 400 songs, probably many more than that by the time this episode comes out, in Dolby Atmos and other immersive formats, bringing new depth to classics by Jason Mraz, Black Sabbath, the B-52s, and Selena Gomez, to name just a few, as well as enhancing new releases from Dave Matthews Band, Tank and the Bangas, Ondara, and Grouplove. Will's expertise in immersive audio and multi-genre mixing has established him as a pioneer in the field, and he continues to inspire a new generation of engineers with this innovative approach and technical skill. Will was also one of the originators of the popular Mix Notes from Hell podcast and was the music producer for the East African Singing Contest show, Maisha Superstar. I want to give a big thank you and a shout out to my brother from another podcast, Matt Boudreau at Working Class Audio, for making our original introduction. At NAMM, please welcome Will Kennedy to Recording Studio Rockstars. Will, my brother, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am. Thank you so much. Wow, when you put it all together like that, it sounds like I've done some things.
You've done a couple of things, man. You seem to be still doing a lot of stuff. The pace at which you guys are mixing immersive songs is pretty stunning too.
Yeah, I think we've been I think through a combination of skill and hard work and luck, we've just established ourselves in that space. We try really hard to stay on top of all of the new stuff that is constantly happening with immersive mixing and now recording as well. And hopefully, our clients and the labels we work with understand that, if they want top quality results, hopefully we're the people they call.
Okay, cool. Well, it's pretty amazing what you guys have done there. Tell us a little bit about, give us I read your intro, which a lot of that comes directly from your bio, but give us a little bit in your own words about your kind of arc from, the brief version from getting interested in music. You're a musician first, isn't that correct?
Yes. I did not know that I was going to end up in the recording field until really my second year at Berklee College of Music. I want to make a long story short here. I grew up in a very, very small town in Western New York State, farming community near Niagara Falls.
Oh, nice. I love Niagara Falls.
Yeah, it was a great area. It's beautiful. But not a lot of connection to the music business. And not a lot of awareness that there were ways to make a living at it without either teaching it or playing in a symphony orchestra, or, and everybody made jokes about like, oh, or you can go try and be a pop star, but that's not a career path. That's not a stable career choice. So I started falling in love with music or realizing I was falling in love with music probably middle school, high school. By the time I got out of high school, I knew like I had an experience. I'll tell the story quickly. I went to the very first Lollapalooza tour in 1991. And I'm lucky to have this very vivid memory of the first big downbeat of Jane's Addiction playing Mountain Song.
Oh, such a good one.
And some switch flipped in my brain. And I said to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it, but I want to work with people like this. No pathway in front of me at all. And so that kind of became a guidepost for me, is how do I end up here? And of course, like everybody, it zigzags all over the place. I thought I needed a backup plan. I thought I should go to college and major in something real, to make sure I had something to fall back on if this music thing doesn't work out. But I was just miserable. And what I realize now is I just loved music. I have that, if you want to call it a disease, I have the music disease. It is, I have an overwhelming need to be a part of it and to be working on it and to have it be a huge part of my life. And so every time I tried to veer away from it, it dragged me back from that point forward.
Yeah.
So again, now I'll shorten things up.
Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in.
So I was a political science major my freshman year of college. That made me miserable. I transferred colleges. I became a music education major thinking, okay, still some stability, but now at least I'm doing something with music. I was even more miserable, right? Because now I'm getting closer to the thing that I want to do without actually doing it. And then I realized I'm taking half measures, right? So I dropped out of college for a couple of years to try and get my head straight about, what am I doing here? And during that period of time, I had a girlfriend she was going to Boston University. We decided to move in together. I moved to Boston, and I don't know. I think I had
in the 90s.
This would have been, so the move to Boston happened in 95.
I'm from Boston,
Oh, really? Well,
yeah, I'm from the burbs out there.
Which town?
Concord, Acton, Wayland. Those are the towns I grew up in. Maynard, my family ran a movie theater there.
I know them all very well because I ended up living in Boston for the better part of 10 years.
It's a great place.
It's my adopted hometown.
And it's always funny to me to like have this conversation where like I started out in Massachusetts and I ended up coming down to, home of country music. to learn
Yeah.
about record making. You start out in, you know, well, I guess you were in New York, so you weren't too far away from Boston, but now you are, right?
It's like where I grew up, it's like a 7.5 hour drive.
Yeah.
To Boston.
But I mean, it's a lot closer than being in LA where you are.
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
Yeah.
Yes. So, right. So I moved to Boston. Berkeley was kind of in the ether. I had a cousin who had applied to go there and ended up not going. And I thought I should check this place out. And I took a tour of the campus, such as it was, like 3 buildings or something. But I had a sense that this was where I was going to end up. I was a trombone player. That was my main instrument at that point. I was taking lessons with a brilliant jazz trombone player who also taught at Berkeley. This is before I went to school there, named Phil Wilson. Phil kind of guided my path, helped me get into school. And then I got there and I just keep trying to not end up where I'm eventually going to end up. I became what at the time was known as a music synthesis major, because this was before computers and recording were one and the same, right? Recording at this point is still tape machines and consoles, and there are no computers in the studio other than the ones for automation in the consoles. So I'm building a pickup for my trombone so I can run it through.
Awesome.
So I can run it through effects and amplifiers without it feeding back, and
like a magnetic one that picks up on the vibrations.
No,
or like a microphone.
So brass instruments,
piezo.
you can buy they're called practice mutes. They're a mute you put in the bell of the horn that just kills the sound, so that like if you're a touring musician, you can play in your hotel room and not bother the hell out of everybody, right?
Yeah.
So I took one of those, drilled a hole in the end of it, and put a microphone in there, and then damped down the inside of it. And I ended up having to do a whole bunch of stuff to it to get it to work at all. But then I was playing through that, and then through a bunch of effects pedals and
distortions.
Yeah,
and all kinds of
absolutely.
crazy stuff. That's awesome.
And then I made friends with a guy who was in the recording program there. He was sort of taking the first semester classes, and he's like, "Oh, I got a recording session tonight. Do you want to come?" So I was like, "If it's cool if I hang out, sure." So I went and I watched what was going on. And the guy engineering the session is a guy I'm still friends with, who you may know because Matt Boudreau knows him well, a gentleman named Rado Peter.
I don't know if I met Rado yet.
Rado was...
Apologies to you, Rado, if we didn't meet him.
Rado was... just an incredibly skilled. He was in his final year of school there, and already an accomplished engineer. You could see he had it together. He knew what he was doing. But I started falling in love right there. I was like, oh, I think this is the direction I want to go. And I talked to some people, and the coursework I was taking paralleled the recording coursework for a while. And the further in I got, the more obvious it became recording was where I was going to end up.
Yeah, it's that thing where like you love music and you love doing that, but you have this technical side of you at the same time, and it just starts gluing together, right?
And weirdly, if I think back to middle school and high school, I loved doing the lights for like the high school musical. Yeah. And I remember having this thought back then, like, wow, if I could do something like running this light board, but with sound, right? Because I didn't understand how any of this worked. And here it was.
You were like, these cables look very similar. I don't know. They got three connectors.
And now I've got faders that instead of controlling a light, now it controls sound. This all seems like the kind of thing I was thinking about. So yeah, I ended up in the production engineering department. I graduated Berkeley in 1999, and then kind of through a fluke, ended up in Nashville. I wanted to move to New York. I was 25 years old because remember I'd gone to 2 different colleges and then took 2 years off before I started at Berkeley. So I was older when I graduated.
Yeah.
New York's expensive. I couldn't hack it, and I wasn't going to move back in with my parents at age 25. So I had a friend named Mark LaQuesta, who's still a great friend, and now actually
I know Mark. Mark great.
Mark.
He was an assistant on one of my early sessions.
Yep, worked at Quad.
Yeah, great dude.
So Yeah, now it runs the recording program at Interlochen Academy for the Arts.
Oh, cool. And you were
yeah,
just there. I think I saw that on your Instagram, right?
That is why I was there. I was setting up an Atmos room there for Mark.
Shout out to you, Mark.
So yeah, I knew that Nashville was much more affordable, and especially in '99, much more affordable than New York. And I had it in my head that I was just never going to go to LA. That was not my vibe. So I go to Nashville, I meet up with Mark, I throw some resumes around town, and I think I was going to spend 3 days there, and the last day I'm there, I get an interview at Ocean Way. And they hire me as a studio tech. They ask me, "Oh, how are you with, basically, how are you with fixing equipment?" And I said, I don't know how to answer that because I'm not. That's not what I do. They're like, "Well, we'll train you. Like, okay. And they offered me more money than I thought I was going to get. Not a lot by any stretch of the imagination, but, more than I thought I'd make as an assistant anywhere. So I decided, yeah, let's give it a shot. And I moved to Nashville. And then I very quickly learned that I didn't belong in Nashville. It just wasn't the place for me. Especially, it's definitely a more diverse place now in terms of the music that's happening than it was back then. But it just, I was like, I have fought so hard. I've tried so many times to avoid doing music and then gotten pulled back in. And I felt a little behind the 8 ball because I was a little older. And I just, after 6 months, I had enough experiences there where I was like, this is not where I see myself long-term. I was like, I just have to suck it up and go to New York. So I did.
It's tough when you're getting into this a little bit older because you do have like a more advanced understanding of stuff. Even if you're learning how to make the music that you want to make, you already have an advanced understanding of what music is good to you and stuff. And you might have a strong take on what kind of music you like. I mean, I think about that for myself a lot in Nashville. I'm like, Lidge, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just love country music? You're the best place in the world to make country music, I'm trying. I'm still trying. I'm learning.
Yeah. And for me, I felt like, to use a football analogy, I felt like I had pushed the ball all the way down the field and I was on the 5-yard line and I was willing, I could either make one more big push to get to where I wanted to be, working on the kind of music I wanted to work on, or I could stop there and accept, well, this is where I ended up. And it was kind of trying to figure out, is this, because I knew the economics of the music business in Nashville are, if you're going to make a living in Nashville, in the recording business, you are going to work on country and you are going to work on contemporary Christian music. It's what dominates the music economy there.
In the major studios, for sure, especially at that time.
Yeah, and which isn't to say that other music isn't being made there, but you're going to have a much tougher time piecing together the rents if you say, I'm never working on those two things, right? And I was still young and I thought, I have an opportunity to make a change. I should make the change and see. Like I need to know what this could really be. So I moved to New York. I very quickly end up at a wonderful studio, which is sadly now a Hampton Inn on 48th Street. I just walked past it at AES this year. Wow. Called Right Track Recording. Right Track was run by, at that time, managed by Barry Bon Jovi, brother of Tony Bon Jovi. Both of them worked at Power Station back in the day. And Barry was a killer studio manager who I still think about a lot of things that he said and taught us every day. So I'm there for, I want to say, about a year. And then things take a turn. I had been, when I was 19 and a sophomore in college, I was diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder, which is a form of depression. And at this point, I'm working I don't know what my average hours were in a week, but they were north of 80 and often north of 100 hours a week. There were many, many nights I was sleeping at the studio. And this isn't,
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything that everybody who's worked in a big studio hasn't gone through. That's not specific to me. But a lot of overnights, so not seeing the sun very much, like all the things that I needed to do to take care of myself, which I had not grappled with at that point, I wasn't doing. And my mental health started declining.
And so this is seasonal affective disorder is when people like shine lights in their face and stuff. It's like, dude, you need some sunshine, right?
Yeah. And that's a big feature of my particular kind of depression, but it's not the only thing. So I'll have depressive episodes during the summer, but long story short, there are things that I have to do, including taking medication, but taking care of myself and making sure that I see, some sunlight on a regular basis. And, that was all stuff I hadn't come to terms with yet. And I didn't realize how I kind of thought if I take a pill, I'm going to be fine. And then I stopped taking the pills and I thought, well, I didn't take pills for a long time. I can white knuckle through. I couldn't. And things got so bad that it became clear to me that either I needed to kind of do a life reset and reprioritize my health over the work, because I was definitely prioritizing the work over everything else.
Yeah.
Or
I've been there. And like you say, I think a lot of us are familiar with their own versions of that.
Yes. Yeah. Again, it's not a story that's original in any way.
I guess I was lucky that I never, or if there was any depression surrounding it, I wasn't aware of it enough to label it as such. It was more like, but I mean, like even without something reaching sort of a clinically identifiable level, it really affects you. I mean, like the many hours in like, I was in situations where I was working in just sort of negative, toxic environments. And that just adds up and it adds up and you lose your perspective, if you don't give yourself a break.
Absolutely. And we're often in the studio dealing with difficult personalities.
I wonder why. Why are musicians so difficult?
And part of our gig is to be able to navigate and manage that. And I was so far beyond being able to do any of that. I couldn't navigate or manage my own emotions, let alone anybody else's.
At iZotope, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the iZotope plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at iZotope.com. Is it fair to ask you if you recall any stories or just examples of like what might you have recognized in a moment, in an interaction or a communication with somebody or a response to something that made you think, okay, that's probably not going to be the best way to deal with it?
I can tell you one for sure. So again, when I moved to New York, because I had Ocean Way and being a studio tech on my resume, Right Track hired me as a studio tech. Now I was very upfront in Nashville and again, very upfront in New York. I said, I am not going to be a top flight studio tech. One, I haven't trained for it. I don't have the skill set. And two, it's not the path I want to take. I don't want to get known for being a studio tech. And Barry very kindly at Right Track said, well, we're not going to put you, we've got another tech here who's doing a similar thing. We'll put you on a track towards being an assistant with an eye towards that. So I'm struggling with very long hours, never seeing, friends, never seeing family, and dealing with depression. And then on top of that, doing a job that I don't feel qualified to do every day. Every time the phone rang in the shop at the studio, I was terrified at what I was going to face. Like, can I fix this? Because I would feel guilty. It's my job. I should know how to do this, but I didn't always. So this is very close to the end of my time there. There was, if I'm remembering correctly, there was only one session going on, but it's later in the evening, probably like 9-10 o'clock. So the rest of the studio shut down, but I was the nighttime tech, so I stay until the last session's over. And the session that's going on is like a jazz quintet kind of thing, but it was a jingle session for a Honey Nut Cheerios commercial. And there were a couple of people from the ad agency who, and this is how I remember, it's probably not being fair to them, but I'm going to go with what my memory told me. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, here's a couple of ad guys who decided they're going to go hang out and be cool at a studio for the evening. And, they're not bringing anything to the session that everybody else doesn't know. It's a jingle for a Honey Nut Cheerios commercial. Right. So that's what's in my head. And they have a problem. They were recording on a Sony 3348- machine, and there was a problem with the machine. I don't remember what it was, but I came into the room to look at it. And these two guys, who I'm guessing had taken some form of, let's just say, medication before they got to the studio, are in suits standing over me, just hectoring me. We're not going to pay extra for this. This time comes off of our bill. Yada, da, da, da. And it's just this ongoing monologue from the two of them. Meanwhile, I'm going through my freaked out, I'm not a very good tech thing, trying to figure out what's wrong with this machine, or do we just replace it, or what? How do we solve the problem so that the session can go on? And I had a very visceral thought in my head where I'm like, who the hell cares whether or not this happens tonight even? What if you guys have to come back tomorrow? Everybody has to wait another day to find out whether or not the bee's tummy is tempted with the taste of nuts and honey this time. And I really had, I didn't say it out loud. I caught myself, but I guarantee the vibe was out there where I was just like, screw you, screw this. This isn't worth it.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of the studio. We did get the problem solved. I think we probably swapped out machines. I walked out of the studio and I thought, those people are taking this like heart attack seriously.
Right.
But it's my job to make them believe that I'm taking a heart attack seriously too. And if I can't do this, I've got a problem.
Well, there's so much that we learn through all those processes too. I mean, when you tell that story, I remember the times where I'm standing, sitting in the studio, and as an engineer like yourself, our back might be turned to the rest of the room. Yeah. I always describe it as people are just staring a hole in the back of your head. That's why we all have bald spots back then. And you're sitting there at the computer and you just feel like eyeballs feel like daggers, Yeah. And there might be some difficult situation that just happened, or something where you're asked for something, or they need something, or somebody, in hindsight, I would describe it as kindly tells you that sounds like shit, because there's no reason to beat around the bush. You just want to get to the right answer, Yeah. But in those moments, I would find myself playing out a whole dialogue and scenario in my head. I'm sitting there trying to work, and I'm like air fighting in my head with this client that I'm working with. And it's just like, it's so stupid, because it's like, it's such a distraction, it distracts us from getting the work done that we need.
Yeah. And if I think about it now, when I'm taking care of myself and I'm mentally in a good space, I don't do that. Right. Yeah. The reaction I have to it is to kind of be more meditative about it and go, okay, this is where they're at. I don't need to be there with them. I can make them feel as if I am there with them without experiencing it along with them. But in that moment, in the place I was in my life, I could not separate those two things, and I just needed it to stop. Right. That's what's going on in my head. Is what I want to do is look at the two of them and go, could the two of you please shut the hell up and let me do my job so that you can get on with your session and go away.
I like that you're giving us the clean version of what was actually going on in your head.
Because it was not that clean.
I feel like another thing that I learned through that process too, which I'm guessing maybe you did, is you begin to discover that everybody who's in that studio with you has 100% legitimate perspective and take on what's going on. And like, the person who has a musical idea, even if it seems like it's not what you want, might have a very good reason for that idea. The people who are stressing out, having a heart attack response, they might actually have a heart attack situation, on the other end of their, responsibility and stuff like that. And the more I've learned to just see it that way, the more it's helped me. It helps me relax. I'm like, okay, I don't have to own it. It's just,
we're in a service business, right? So regardless of what my feelings are, that those people were the clients, and my job is to take their concerns seriously, no matter how silly I might personally feel they are. It doesn't matter what my feelings are in that situation. Yeah. And that's what I was no longer, I no longer had the space for in my head, because I was dealing with my own stuff, and I had this much space left to have patience for other people's problems. And that's not a good place to be.
Yeah. When your cup is completely full, they say, you can't add another drop.
And that's where I was. And that's how I knew. And it was heartbreaking to come to the realization, because this was a dream job for me. I thought I was in the place I needed to be, on the path I needed to be on. I was, I'm sure we all know the story of, you've got family and friends who are just questioning why you would do this and why you would put yourself through it. And I thought, no, I'm doing good. I'm making good on what I set out to do. And now I'm going to have to be the one to derail the whole thing. Because I knew it wasn't switching studios. I was going to have to leave the recording business and reset and then see if this really was my future from that point. But that's what I did. I quit the studio.
Well, it's too bad you never landed on your feet and found another good gig. Oh, wait a minute. That's not what happened. You're mixing over 400 Atmos mixes with Matt Wallace right now and producing amazing
spoiler alert,
jazz
Lidge,
records.
You can't let me get to the end of the story. You just got, obviously. Obviously I did end up exactly where I was supposed to be in the end.
Yeah. Now, so you went from New York out to LA finally?
No, I went, so I quit the studio. I was working a temp job in New York City doing data entry or something like that. And then I had a roommate who was editing audiobooks, and I took a gig, like an overnight gig editing audiobooks, just to pay the rent. And again, all of these stories can be so long, and I need to condense them.
And this is now we're in the era of computers, or not quite yet?
So for the audiobooks, yes, because you're editing, right? This is not multi-track recording. And they would, even at that point, the audiobook stuff was being recorded on DAT and then imported from DAT to editing software, and then we would edit it. And then but even that, I forget what the deliverable was for an audiobook at that point. I didn't have to deal with it, so I never learned.
Just did my first audiobook recently.
Oh, nice. Yeah, they're actually,
I didn't have to edit though.
Yeah, so in that roommate still, that's what he does for a living. So anyway, while I was doing that, when I was at Berkeley, I had a number of part-time jobs, one of which was doing audiovisual. I was an audiovisual tech at Harvard University.
Cool.
Just doing, sometimes I was videotape classes. A lot of times, I think because I was a production engineering major at Berkeley, they'd bring me in to do sound for like student concerts and things like that.
Yeah. And
I happened to reach out to a former teacher of mine from Berkeley who was now working at Harvard in an attached but different department. And he said, hey, the department you used to work for, the AV department, they need a supervisor. Now, keep in mind, I was 25 or 26 at the time. I forget. So I am now looking at, I'm like, supervisor. So you mean I would go back and be the boss of full-time people 20 years older than me who were my boss a year and a half previously? But I was like, well, I love Boston, and it's a place where I can, I'm settled. I don't have to learn a whole new place. So I went up. They were so desperate to get somebody to take this job that I did 2 interviews in one day, and they hired me before I got on the bus back to New York City.
Wow.
And
nice,
then
man.
I had a friend who had an open room in their apartment, and I thought that the universe is trying to tell me something. This is the move. So I did. I took that job, and I spent 4.5 years as what was my title?
And this was the job at Harvard, or
this was at Harvard? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was the technical operations supervisor of the Media and Technology Services Department for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard College.
There you go. Wow.
That is a mouth. Wow. I'm surprised I pulled all that back.
Did you have to sip tea out of little porcelain cups with a
this
saucer?
Job could not have been more the opposite of that. No, we had a dingy. So this was a department of. I had at peak times of the year, when school was in session. I had 12 full-time employees and up to 35 part-time employees working for me that I had to supervise.
Well, it's fascinating. You must have learned a lot. I mean, it's these unexpected career paths where it's like
yes.
your brain might have thought like, what am I doing? I'm not making a record. But then simultaneously you're learning an incredible amount about organizing, directing, delegating,
logistics,
all those things.
Yeah, logistics. I was still doing some of the gigs, if it was a big concert. And we did on occasion, it's Harvard. So, like, oh, Hillary Clinton speaking at the Sanders Theater tonight. Well, yeah, it's one microphone, but that microphone cannot break.
SM57s. Yeah. 2 Shure SM. Did you know that 2 Shure SM57s is the president's microphone always on the podium?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. They're bulletproof, and you've got 2 of them. It's unlikely one's going to break. It's impople that 2 are. So,
right.
Yeah,
and you can always hammer the other one back together with the second one.
Yes. So yeah, all of that. And the 2 big things I took away, I took a lot of things away from that job at Harvard. But the 2 big ones were, one, that job, it's a full-time gig, wonderful. And if anybody ever gets a chance to work at Harvard, by the way, take it. It's a wonderful place to work. I worked with a great team of people. They were quirky. This is AV people we're talking about here.
Right.
But I was quirky too. I'm not separating myself from that. But the first thing is it allowed me to come to terms with my depression and what it meant in terms of management in my life. The second thing was the people skills, being a boss, having to manage people and their emotions and do it in a kind and gentle way. That is still something that I carry with me to this day. And honestly, I'm a 26-year-old kid to the full-time people I'm working with who they were the boss of 18 months before. And now I'm their boss. That's insane.
Wild. That's wild, dude.
Yeah. So there's a lot of how do you navigate all this? And I'm not saying I was good at it to start with, but I had to figure it out.
Now, what part of this, as it led you back into the music making, did this give you a new perspective of like, oh wow, if I know how to work with other people better, I'm actually capable of making better music and better records than I ever was before, kind of thing? Because I've noticed that myself sometimes, that like collaborations can make the greatest, creations.
I would love to give myself enough credit to say that was going through my head at the time, but it wasn't. I was very much wrapped up in surviving my day-to-day.
Right.
Then I had no idea whether or not I was ever going to find my way back to the music business. So yeah, no, that was, it's a thing I look back on, and in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I see what I took with me from that situation that's made me better at this one.
Now, another question of looking back in hindsight, do you think the bee is still hungry for Cheerios at this point? Did it remain hungry all this time?
I haven't seen the commercials in a while, so I guess I haven't been keeping up with the plot. I mean, are they still using the bee?
I had the wrong cereal in my head. I was like, Nut and Honey, but that was actually a different
one.
That
was a different, yeah.
It was the nut and honey craze is what it was.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. This was
Awesome.
Honey Nut Cheerios was the cereal. Yeah.
So bring us forward to where you are now and where you're joining us from.
Yeah. So that's the next step. So I was back in Boston for about 4.5 years. And that job I knew had run its course. I had met the woman who is now my wife. And I knew it was
well
time.
Done.
I was about to turn 30, and I thought I've got one more big push left in me. And I have this idea in the back of my head that I need to know whether or not I could make a go of this. So I talked to my then girlfriend. I said, I'm thinking about maybe going to LA. LA is where all the records I wanted to work on were happening.
Right.
And having had the experience of being in Nashville and being in New York City and knowing what those worlds were, I had a better understanding of, okay, if I want to work on the kind of stuff that appeals to me, I need to be very clear-eyed about where it's happening. And it was happening here. So
here is where you're joining us now, which is
Los
LA.
Angeles.
Yeah, Los Angeles. And of course you were thinking when they said coming down the mountain, they're referring to coming down from Mulholland down the canyon to come make rock and roll in the studios.
Yeah, it wasn't Bear Mountain in New York City. I'm pretty sure.
All right,
outside of New York. So in February of 2005, we picked up and left Boston and moved to Los Angeles. And one of the first gigs I got out here was doing some archive work for Ray Charles Enterprises. It wasn't long after Ray had passed away, and I knew how to run tape machines. So I was doing that. And at the time, that work was being done through the Village Studios here in Los Angeles.
Right.
That
I never got to see the Village, but I heard various recordings from there, and I heard great things about it.
Yeah. So, and it's now managed by one of my old classmates from Berkeley, a wonderful, very talented woman named Tina Morris.
Right on.
Who's been there for a long time. So the Ray Charles thing ended. At which point I end up becoming a 30-year-old runner at the Village. That for entirely of my own doing. But I didn't belong there, and I was not. I was coming to a place where I realized, as much as I was trying to push through, like, okay, this is what I do now. If I want to do this, I have to be a runner at a studio. There were a lot of things about doing it that were not compatible with my personality.
Right.
And I'm not talking about the job so much as just the situation there.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus, Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode.
And eventually,
let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
You went from New York to LA.
Mm-hmm.
The studio runner thing. I mean, the first time I heard the term runner for the studio was in LA, was in Burbank. Did they use the same term in New York?
No.
Did you hear that used in Nashville? I feel like in Nashville, somebody just walked across the street to get lunch and bring it back to the studio, you know?
There was a term for it in Nashville. It might have been, I remember it being different. I heard runner in Nashville, but I knew when people would say it, they would usually say, oh, that's an LA thing. New York, it's GA, general assistant.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And that maybe comes from, well, ironically, maybe that comes from film.
Yeah, it might. It very well may. And I forget what the Nashville term was. Mark LaQuesta would know.
Yeah. And I imagine, in my head, that a runner for a studio in LA makes lots of sense, because in LA, it can be hard to get from one place to another.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the job isn't honestly all that different, other than when you're in New York, you're walking or taking the subway, and here you're
Right.
driving.
Right.
But you're still running out. Oh, somebody needs food. You got to go get the food somewhere else
Yeah.
and bring it back.
Yeah. And now, of
the
course,
gig
these
doesn't
days,
change.
you just order it on your phone and it shows up. Same thing. Now everybody's a runner, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You've outsourced the actual running part.
Now, another thing that was very Nashville, or at least for me, it was brand new. It was the idea of cartage. So you probably dealt with that in Nashville,
New York, and LA. Cartage was, yeah.
We tell the rock stars what that is and how it might be same or different.
So cartage, it was pretty much the same in all three places. So if you're hiring in a session player, like drummer's a great example, and you're hiring them for a specific sound, a specific reason. Usually that drummer will have all of their drums, and they probably have a lot of them stored at a warehouse somewhere. And that warehouse would be owned by this company called a cartage company. And part of their gig it wasn't just to store the drums. It was, the drummer calls them up and says, I have a session. If it's Nashville, I have a session at Ocean Way, Nashville, next Wednesday. And next Wednesday, the cartage company loads up all the drums the drummer has asked for and brings them to the studio and sets them up. And oftentimes we'll tune the drums ahead of time. Just depends on how full service they are. And then when the session's over, they come and pick them all up and bring them back and store them again. And that guitar players, bass players, anybody who was a gigging session musician would usually have instrument cartage. And then that would all be billed to the session. That was part of the cost of doing business.
Yeah. And I guess a way to think about it, because that might be shocking to somebody the first time you hear that, but
and it doesn't happen very much anymore. It's kind of a vestige of the old days.
Yeah. I guess because there was money for it, and there was people doing tons and tons of session gigs too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the reason for it is, if you've got 2 sessions in a day, which happened fairly regularly, or you've got, one session at one studio one day and a different studio the next day and a different studio the day after that, you're not going to be the one, you don't want to drive your stuff back and forth and set it up and break it down and put it in the car and figure out where to store it overnight and then drive it. Yeah, and they were making enough money that they could afford to pay other people to do it for them.
And also, I think that the instruments themselves, the guitar zone, the bass zone, the drums, I don't know if the violinist had to worry about cartage, but those zones themselves were like building a studio within a studio.
Yeah.
It was a pretty complex thing that needed to be created. So
yeah, and the instrumentalist wants to feel comfortable. Like they want to be able, they're a performer, right? And you have to treat them like an actor walking onto a stage. They want to feel as that when they walk through the door and sit down at their little station to play, that they're as prepared to do the gig as they can be. And that they feel comfortable and creative and ready to go. They don't want to be fiddling around with cables or setting up pedals or, any of that. They just want it. Okay, this is what my thing looks like. Everything's ready to go. It's all in the right order. Okay.
And there's good reasons for that too.
Yeah.
That applies to all the aspects of creativity that we do.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Why do why does somebody want to be able to just walk in and sit down and get straight to work? And how does that apply to the things you do today?
Because creativity is a finite resource, right? And it's a combination of, knowledge and energy and all this stuff that if you're in a situation where you're the drummer and you come to the session and you have to unload the drums, and then you have to set up the drums, and then you have to tune the drums, and then you have to get sounds on the drums. By the time all this stuff is finished and you're getting to the part where, okay, now I have to learn a song and play it, you've already burned through a large portion of that energy. And that takes away from the potential energy you can put into creativity, right? So that's what you're always trying to maximize is you don't want to spend, you want to spend as little time as possible making the performers think about anything other than the performance.
Yeah, that's great. Well put, man. Well put. I mean, as a trombonist, I mean, maybe your setup wasn't as tough, but you know what it's like to suddenly be asked to, 1, 2, 3, 4, perform. And it's
Yeah.
like, you want to be at your 100% best in that moment. Now let's jump forward. As a recording engineer or a producer or a mixer, give us an example of that, separating those two things in the same way as you just did for a drummer in that situation.
Oh, I can tell you, it is an ongoing thing for me that whenever I'm engineering a session, especially a tracking session, really any time there is a performer involved, my job is to make the technical side of what's happening as seamless and fast as possible. And that means I'm not going to spend 4 hours getting the kick drum to sound perfect, because nobody is ever going to say, you know why that song was a hit? It's because of that last 0.5% you found in that kick drum sound. No. You get the kick drum to sound good. You can pre-plan a bunch of stuff to aim it in the direction you want. And if you're good at your job, you'll bring all the elements together so that when you have the drummer and the kit and the microphones and you planned all that stuff ahead of time and you pull up the faders, it should already sound pretty close to what you were thinking in your head. If you're digging and digging and digging for a sound, you're siphoning creative energy away from the instrumentalist. So it is a huge deal for me that I do a ton of prep work before I get to the studio, and then I make sure that I leave myself enough space, enough time from when I arrive at the studio to when the instrumentalists are going to arrive at the studio, the artist is going to arrive at the studio, to make sure that they're thinking as little as possible about all of the technical stuff that I have to do. That's my gig. And the other piece of that gig is they walk in the door. Okay, here's where you go. Here's your headphones. Here's how you use your little headphone station. What can I do? Is this microphone in a place where you feel like you can do your best performance? I can't tell you the number of times I've had that conversation with a drummer who's surprised, who's like, oh, you don't need me to play around your microphones? I'm like, the last thing I want you to do is to be thinking about where my microphone is. Because again, it's that performance that it's my job to capture. It's not their job to enable my capturing of their performance. That's putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, that's great, man. I like that quote. I just wrote it down so I can go find it later. The last thing I want you to do is be thinking about where my microphone is.
Yeah.
When you're about getting ready to
There's
start.
always another option, right? Is it the most perfect option? No. But being a recording engineer, being a producer means enabling the artist and the musicians to do their best work. They're not there to enable us to do our best work. We don't exist without them.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I remember learning some of this stuff, going through those processes at the first studio I was at, where I'm like, we're getting up a sound. I mean, I really screwed up. And to be honest, like I remember having, I think it was Marshall Chapman actually was coming in to do a session, and the band was there, and I get a phone call, and it was like 11 o'clock. I get a phone call at my house and wakes me up, and it's like, where are you? The gate's locked. We're trying to get in. And I haven't shown up for the session. I didn't really even know when we were starting, and I hadn't set up for anything. So I just show up and I start setting up while everybody's there. It was just sort of hilarious. So, I guess it's encouraging to those watching too, to know that, I mean, I don't know what you might think about the records I've made, but, I would suggest that probably all of us have had records, in that learning experience where we've just completely done the wrong thing, because that's how you learn how to do the right thing too. It was after that it's like, oh, I should show up at the studio early. Oh, I should probably set up before the band gets here. Oh, I should probably find out what they want to do before I set up, stuff like that.
And as much as people might look at the old studio system and say it's a vestige of an older time, and in a lot of ways it is, and we can certainly achieve amazing things in much smaller spaces with much more economical setups than we used to be able to. The thing that we've lost is that all that stuff you're talking about, I got to watch some of the greats in the business do, right? Yeah. I learned how to do all the things that I'm talking about, all that prep work, all that thinking ahead of time, all that like focusing on performance, all that stuff comes from my ability to have gone through that sort of apprenticeship. And that's what's tough for people now, is that those spaces don't exist, or they're very rare now, where anybody can go and see how their heroes do the work. Yeah. And watch them make mistakes, and watch how, because a lot of times it's not so much that they never make a mistake, it's how they manage the mistake once it's made.
How they just navigate right around it and stuff.
Yes.
And so, of course, and also I misspoke. I said Marshall Chapman. I meant Marshall Crenshaw, so totally different.
Oh, okay. And I just nodded my head right along. Marshall Chapman, yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, as I was saying it, I was about to say, and then he called me, and I was like, wait a minute, I think Marshall Chapman's a totally different artist. But that's me. Oh, now I kind of forgot what my train of thought was, but
I'll tell you what.
I know what it was. What it was. So it's that, one of the closest versions we have to that these days is things like YouTube and videos to sort of bring you into worlds, and you get to learn from stuff. And
but even those
podcasts. But these are everybody on their best behavior.
That's what I was just going to say.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're never going to see the real lessons are rarely big moments, right? They're rarely the kind of thing that anybody puts in a video that's going to get enough views to get a bunch of people to watch it, right? It's in those long periods where it feels like you're not doing anything as an assistant engineer, but you're soaking up a way of working that you are later going to implement without even realizing that's where it came from. You're gonna start going, oh, I'm assisting so-and-so today. That's somebody I've worked with before. I really appreciate the way they run a session. Or I'm working with somebody who I don't appreciate the way they work a session. And in that space, you may be thinking, well, I like the way they do this, but I don't like these other bits and pieces of how they're managing their day or the technical setup or whatever. And so you omit that from your future ideas, right? And then when you get to sit in the chair and do the thing, you can start to try those things on and say, all right, well, this thing that my favorite engineer that I ever worked with, my favorite producer I ever worked with doesn't work for me, it turns out. But this thing that this other person who I didn't think I was into does work for me. Oh, that's surprising. Like it's not a thing that's a moment you can capture and put out. It's all, anything that we learn is, it's a little bit of pressure applied over a long period of time. Yeah. And sometimes you don't even realize it's happening.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Matt Wallace, joining us from
Except I'm Will Kennedy. I look a lot like Matt Wallace.
What did I just say? What did I just say? Let me say that all over again. I was thinking about the studio. Oh, boy.
It's my studio too, Lidge. A lot of this gear is mine.
Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Will Kennedy, joining us from Los Angeles. And Will, you ready to jam, dude?
I am. I'm always ready to jam.
All right, so we've talked a lot about your backstory, and I would love to jump forward in the second half of this interview and really like dive into some of these records you're making.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you wouldn't mind, as much as I don't want to interrupt the jam, let me finish the story, because it's probably going to lead to where you're going. No, it's fine. So I think I was saying I had worked at the Village. Let's just say that came to an end. It was not a good fit for either the studio or me. And I moved on. That led me to sometime later, again, with the theme of I keep getting stuck in these teching gigs. That led me to I need to make money. I need to pay rent. So I took on a couple of wiring gigs around town, and one of those, maybe 8 or 9 months later, so it's got to be towards the end of 2006. One of those wiring gigs, a guy that I had worked with got in touch with me and said, "Listen, I have a friend who's putting a new studio together, and he needs to have it wired up. I don't have the time. Would you be interested?" And at this point, I'm trying really hard to do none of this. I just want to engineer, and I'm taking like these little bits and pieces engineering jobs with. I had a friend who ran an indie label. It had a tiny studio. I'm doing stuff there. I'm going out and seeing shows and trying to get indie bands to work with me, that kind of thing. So he says, I knew, I was like, man, this gig's going to be like a month. I'm not going to be able to do any other engineering work during this time. And he's like, oh, and the guy who hooked me up with gigs says, oh, he's a great friend of mine. He engineered some Ozzy Osbourne records. And don't get me wrong, I love some Ozzy Osbourne, but that's not, that's not making me think, oh, well, this is worth not pursuing the thing I want to do for a month to do soldering. Yeah. I said, I'll tell you what, I needed the dough. So I said, let me meet with him. And if he's cool, because that was the thing. I was like, if this is going to be a month, if this guy's painful to deal with, I'm just not doing it. Well, that guy turned out to be, first of all, one of the most wonderful human beings you could ever hope to meet. His name was David Bianco. David is a Grammy-winning engineer. I met with him. And just immediately you walk into the room, you're like, this guy is the best. And I remember after, we met up at the place that he was eventually going to turn into a studio. It was it had been a studio. It was built in the 70s, but it had fallen into terrible disrepair, and he was going to rehab it. And I went home that night and I looked up his credits. And it turned out he had mixed, produced, or engineered like 5 or 6 of my favorite records. Wow. And I had no idea. So I called him the next day and I said, David, I will do this gig for half price if you promise to tell me stories about working on these records while I'm stuck in the shop soldering at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And he was as good as his word. He absolutely did that. And then when it took about a month, we got the studio up and running. And he brought me on as his assistant.
That's great.
And that's what kicked off really where I ended up now is because of that happening. And then in quick succession, my girlfriend and I were about to get married. We did that on the East Coast. So I left town. David had to bring in, he had a crew of 2 of us that would swap out assisting him at his studio. So he brought the other guy who's still a great friend named Rafael Serrano in to assist. And when I got back from getting married, he said, we need to find you a gig. And I said, you really don't. You know, you've done so much already. I'm so thankful. And he's like, no, we're going to help out. And within a week or two, I want to say, I got a call saying, hey, would you want to do some sort of I don't know what the right term for it would be, but engineering work, but sort of secondary. I'm not going to be the main engineer on the gig, but I'm going to be recording, you know, like sort of doing editing work and doing, you know, the third backup vocal overdub, like that kind of stuff, for a producer named Matt Wallace. And
right on.
I met with Matt, and I remember he asked me a bunch of questions about, you know, what consoles I liked and stuff like that. And he brought me in, and that was April or May of 2007. And that has been an enduring partnership ever since. First with me engineering his productions. And then eventually, you know, we did that from 07 to maybe 2011 or 2012. It was a pretty steady flow of albums. And I graduated from, you know, being the overdub and edit guy to being his main tracking engineer. And again, he had a crew of 2 or 3 of us that would swap in and out depending on the project. But Matt and I became great friends. David, by the way, David and I were great friends until he sadly passed away in 2018. I always say I got my bachelor's degree at Berkeley. I got my master's degree in Nashville and New York, and Matt and David are who I earned my doctorate with.
Yeah, that's great. That's so cool.
Yeah. And so, yeah, eventually I went out on my own. That's when I started. I put my own little studio together in about 2009, started doing more of my own gigs. Budgets around this time, if anybody was around then, you remember they went from being reasonable to almost impossible to manage. Matt couldn't afford to hire engineers anymore, even though, you know, same thing, you might have gotten $100,000 to do 2 or 3 years before, and now you're getting $10,000 to $20,000 to do, and expecting the results are going to be the same.
I remember one of my mentors here, Glenn, would talk about, Glenn Rosenstein would talk about recording budgets going from, you know, a big chunk where you could do all kinds of great things years ago to now what used to be the catering budget for the record becomes the entire recording budget.
And that's not an exaggeration. That's absolutely true. Now, you know, people can debate whether or not it was too much money before, but it's definitely not enough now. We expect a lot for too little. But all that said, so
a lot of great records were made with those budgets.
Absolutely. So Matt and I, even, you know, I go out on my own, but we stay friends. And we see each other regularly. We do maybe 1 or 2 projects together a year, but it's, you know, I would come in and do the tracking dates, the big tracking dates. We go to Sunset Sound or East West or something. And I'd only be on the project for a few days, and then Matt would take it from there. But in 2021, we got put on this Atmos thing that we both absolutely said, no, that's a waste of time. We both seen 5-1. We both seen Quad. We know how this book ends. We don't need to read it a third time.
That's funny.
But great mutual friend of ours named Brad Wood turned us around on it.
Yeah.
We had an experience at his studio where we just both went, oh my God, this is not what we thought it was. This is something we can tell musical stories in a different way than
I've
stereo.
been having that experience too. I've been having that experience, hearing some of the actual Atmos speaker setups, the arrays like the Atom Audio Atmos room at AES that I saw you at recently. PMC did a big one at NAMM.
Yep.
And even finally myself learning how to just simply understand in a pair of headphones the difference between the stereo mix and the Atmos mix. You know, even just going and listening to your discography just before this interview, which Rockstar, as a reminder, we have a link probably both should have to the Spotify playlist and to an Apple Music playlist so you can hear the Atmos mixes that Will's doing.
Yeah, and I'll do the quick public service announcement here. If you're a Spotify listener, you cannot hear any kind of immersive audio.
Right.
So it's only on Apple Music, Tidal, and Amazon that you can. So just so people are aware, because you might, if you go to the version of like Black Sabbath's Live Evil on Spotify, you're definitely not hearing our work.
Right. Yeah. So you need to be aware that if you're not familiar with that yet, when Apple Music is playing the Atmos version, you'll see a little Dolby
there'll be a little
right?
Dolby Atmos symbol.
Yeah. So you'll know for sure you're hearing it. And then when you, like for me, learning how to go into the settings and force it to play the stereo and then force it to play the Atmos mix, and then making sure that the level matching is on, or the sound check feature.
That's huge.
That was a big win for me to learn that, because then you hear the difference and then you go like, oh, wow, the Atmos mixes sound amazing.
We have, and let me just, I have this completionist thing in my head. So
please,
I'll just
continue on
quickly, because we're right near the end now. So
I'm enjoying every word of it.
The end of this is Matt and I, who will never do we're both wired the same in this way. Neither of us will ever do anything that is a brilliant technical achievement with no musical or emotional reason, right? So yeah, okay, we can put all these speakers up and everything. If you're not making people feel something different than what they could feel with two speakers, what the hell are we all doing here? And that's what we thought going in. And hearing Brad had just finished mixing a Liz Phair record, and he played us a song that we'd never heard before. We both walked out of there and looked at one another and went, did you feel that? Have you ever felt something like that listening in stereo? In between the two of us, we've got close to 70 years of experience doing this. If neither of us had felt that in stereo by now, with the Lord knows how many hours of listening, we were like, this has to be something special. And we immediately went, all right, this is what we do now.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's how we end up here.
Yeah. I mean, and to be completionist myself, listening to your stuff and flipping between the stereo and the Atmos, I hear the Atmos open up in a way that sounds really special to me. And then it's like, oh, wow, there's a clarity to it. And more importantly, I think even to your point of like, why worry about a technical thing? I mean, there's so many things in audio that come along and they're like, ooh, this new technical bell and whistle. And then you might check it out and you're like, yeah, but it sounds stupid, so
yes,
who cares, but listening to Atmos, they really nailed it. Or you guys are all together are really nailing it. It's really sounding rich and clear and full.
Thank you.
It has all the qualities that you would hope to hear in music. It sounds high fidelity.
That is one of the hidden but massive advantages that immersive audio in general and Atmos specifically has, is that there are rules about how loud the mixes can be, and the deliverables. The mixing and mastering are often the same thing in Atmos because of these strict level rules.
Tell us, hip us to some of those rules if you want.
So if you're out there mixing for stereo these days, and everybody tends to look at, average integrated levels of their mix, right? Everybody's trying to be competitive in stereo. And one of the big fights we all have is my mix as loud as the other things that might be on, say, the same Spotify playlist or in the A&R meeting or whatever. So we are just squeezing and squeezing and squeezing to make our thing as loud as or louder than everything else. We have long since gone past the point where we are every dB you're getting is doing massive amounts of damage to the fidelity. We're so far past that the point of realistic, like, okay, this is loud, but the fidelity's still good. No, we're ruining the fidelity, but because human beings hear, and I'm not accepting myself from this, we hear louder as better. So your stereo mix these days is anywhere between -9 and -5 or -6, integrated level, dB integrated level, or LUFS. Atmos mixes will be rejected unless you hit this number, must be at -18 or lower.
Wow, that's like film kind of specs, isn't it?
Yes. early on, I talked to somebody at Dolby about how they landed on that number, and they said they tested a number of consumer devices and found that and let me make a technical connection here. So it's minus 18 for the speaker mix. That translates to when it folds down into, because Atmos mixes fold down into a binaural headphone mix. Usually you end up at around minus 14 for the binaural. Okay. Minus 14 is about the point at which most consumer headphone amps, line amps, start to distort. So not only have we been distorting our mixes, we've been then running them through line amps that are distorting them on playback.
Yeah.
Now, that's not true for everything, and the efficiency of these things changes over time. I don't know when they did these tests, so it may not be true anymore, but that was the reasoning behind it. We're like, if we're going to do this hi-fi thing, let's make it maximum hi-fi. Yeah. So when you say this sounds much more open, a big piece of it is we don't have to compress it. We don't have to limit it. We don't have to do any of that stuff. And then the offshoot of that is, and I was shocked by this, when we are given a catalog thing to remix, I'm thinking, well, we've got to identify the compression, the limiting, the mastering EQ, like all this stuff that's been applied globally to the mix. But in recreating the mixes, the moment you throw a compressor on, unless you're doing it for coloration, it almost always not only doesn't match the original stereo, like it doesn't feel right, but it makes it sound small.
Wow. So it's almost like saying the more you try and mimic the way the stereo mix was done, as far as compression goes, the further you get from the result when you're mixing it in Atmos?
I don't want to say that it's a hard and fast rule, but it's happened so many times where I thought, oh, I know what we're missing here. We need to compress it. Right. And then I'll throw a compressor on, and then I'm like, nope, that's not it. And then I have to reach for something else. A lot of times it's actually overdrive.
Oh, because you just need to bring up some harmonic energy.
Because we think about all these old records and we're like, everything is so open and everything's so hi-fi. And in some cases, that's absolutely true. But we've worked on a bunch of stuff where it was absolutely clear that every piece of equipment in the studio needed a hernia operation when the mixing session was over. Like they were driving the console, they were driving the tape machine, they were driving the tape. And we got, it's got to have that vibe, right? We're trying to make the people who are fans of the catalog stuff that we're charged with mixing for Atmos want it to push the same nostalgia buttons in them that the stereo mix does. It's not, we don't need to make those things a hit. They're already hits. They already have fans everywhere. Nobody came to us and said, hey, Will and Matt, make the B-52's Love Shack sound like your mix of Love Shack. No, nobody wants that. They want their Love Shack, but expanded, enhanced.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. So what do you want to say about that? I mean, I know each record's potentially, each record is probably different and unique, but in what are some of the ways that you can recreate these sorts of things? Do you use the same tools from project to project, or do you find that the tools have to vary also because each project's got such a unique history of sound?
We it's kind of a multifaceted answer. When we're working on catalog stuff, we'll do a pretty deep dive into the history of the recording of that thing.
Yeah.
Right. What studio was it done at? Who engineered it? Who produced it? What kind of console was it mixed on? What studio was it mixed at? What, if we can track down what equipment did that studio have available? So if we're trying to chase down, like, one of the tunes we did a couple of romantics songs. We did.
Yeah. I saw that was one of the ones I was going to ask you about it. Talking in Your Sleep.
Yeah, Talking in Your Sleep. I did a little happy dance when I found out we were going to do that one. That's just, God, I love that song.
They played at my college on the outdoor thing. I remember seeing them play that song.
So good. So that one, like, about 70% of the sound of that song is the reverb. And
interesting.
We chased it and chased it and chased it and chased it, and eventually figured out that the reason we couldn't match it is because there'd been a recent remaster of the song that had, like, basically they'd made it so loud and added so much bottom end to the remaster that it was clouding our ability to figure out what it had been in the beginning. And we had all the information. We're like, but they didn't have, like, we're piling reverbs on to try and find. So we're like, but they couldn't have done this. Mm-hmm. This isn't the way, like, we have track sheets in front of us. We can see. And eventually we tracked down the original mastering job. And then it turned out it was like an EMT 250 plate.
Wow.
But we will do that. Okay, they had an EMT 250 in the studio. Let's use an EMT 250 plugin. And Atmos is really, for all intents and purposes, it's a digitally native format. There are people attempting to do analog stuff with it. It's really not how it was designed, and it makes working in the format extraordinarily cumbersome.
Right. So embracing the fact that it's a new digital format is a good approach to it.
And I was not an in-the-box mixer until we started Atmos. Wow. I had an analog chain and gorgeous, stereo converters.
When it comes to these digital formats and that kind of thinking, I think part of the answer is there's plenty of room for analog. It's when you capture the sound. It's at the beginning of the stage when you're creating it and producing it. You make your sound. Use the analog gear to get the tone you're looking for, but then let the digital stuff do what it's great at.
And one of the things that working in Atmos taught me really quickly, because I wasn't I was like, oh, how are we going to do this? All this stuff that was originally done in analog digitally. And then we did it. We had to, so we did it. And the song that is constantly going through my head is Love Shack, right? It was one of the early ones we did. And it took us 3 days to mix. I've told the story before. The long story short is, not only we're working from the multi-tracks, right? So we have to remix this from scratch as if it's never been done before, except we have to match an already existing really great mix that everybody in the world knows. So for 2 days, we're chasing the sounds and chasing the sounds and chasing the sounds, and it's not quite right. It's not doing the thing for me that I know Love Shack needs to do. I think Matt wanted to kill me, because Matt will very much be like, he's really good at going, no, that's like, if you're mixing something that nobody's heard before, he's really good at finding the vibe of a thing and then letting go. Nope, that's good enough. We don't need to sand off the rough edges. I'm much more of a detail-oriented person, and I will tend to oversand. It's why we work really well together.
He lets go
a little too early. I hang on a little too long, and somewhere in between us is the sweet spot, right?
That's great.
So,
That's great.
But this one, I was like, it doesn't have the thing yet. And then I'm thinking, like, I'm looking at the tracks, and we had the stereo master we're flipping back and forth and listening to. And the stereo master, there's a lot of reasons this happens all the time with old stereo masters versus tracks. The length will be different.
Right.
But this was way off, like 6 or 7 seconds, as opposed to usually it's like half a second or something.
Right, because the tape speed or
Yes.
the mastering, they might have sped it up for radio.
And
all
that
those
is
things.
exactly what it was. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, none of us, like, we don't live in a world where we think about this stuff anymore. And this was my first moment of, I have to think like it's 1989. And in 1989, all the time during mastering, people would go, you know what, it just needs a little more energy. And they'd speed up the tape slightly. So
Nobody
I
ever
sped up.
slows the tape down, right?
No. At least not in our experience.
Maybe the Butthole Surfers did. I don't know.
So we went in and VSO'd the multi-track, and bang, there it was. There was the sound of Love Shack. And we recently, our friend Steve Jenowick called me, this is maybe a month and a half or 2 months ago, and said, hey, do you have your, because we did the Love Shack mix in 2022. So Steve calls up, do you have the ADM file, which is a deliverable file for Atmos for Love Shack around? I said, yeah, what do you need? He said, I'm sitting in an Atmos studio with Don Was right now. Don Was, for those who don't know, produced Love Shack.
Oh, right on.
Don hasn't heard the mix. He'd like to hear it. I'm like, oh my God. So I immediately stop everything I'm doing, send the ADM file to Steve, and 15 minutes later, my phone rings, and it's Don Was.
Were you
And
nervous at the same time as you
Oh
said it?
my God, yes. And Don says, you guys did an amazing job. He's like, the moment it started, I knew that you nailed it. It just, it felt
awesome.
The feeling that we were going for. Everything was there. And I'm like, yes. Now, all of that to say, none of that record was recorded digitally. There was no part of that process until it was put on CD, as far as I know, that was done digitally.
Yeah.
And we were able to recreate it to the point that Don Was said we nailed it. So what am I doing hanging on to my analog, mixing chain, other than it's kind of I like what it does. I'm not saying it's bad or that it's a bad choice for anybody.
It keeps the room warm.
Yeah. For me, it was, is this just a crutch now for me? And I decided, for my own sort of, from my journey, I was like, I think it's time to let this go. Because if that didn't teach me a lesson about how much of this is the person in the chair and how much of it is the gear,
right?
What has to hit me over the head before I realize?
Well, there's always analog elements. There's always going to be a speaker cone. There's
always going to be a microphone.
There's going to be some sort of diaphragm. I mean, I guess Odyssey headphones don't have a speaker cone in them necessarily. So there's going to be new ways to deliver the sound, but the air's moving, the eardrum's moving. That's analog. So, hey, I wanted to ask you, that was a great story, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to ask you also about the Romantics track. So one of the notes I wrote down about talking in your sleep, which sounds fantastic, is that crisp, bright top end that happens in that production. Yeah. And it's a reminder of a style. And my question is that a lost style of music making? Obviously not, because you were able to mix it into Atmos. But is that, what are your thoughts about that? It's like there's an era of that kind of crisp, clear sound. Even when I think about Big Star recording at Ardent, those records, there's a crispness to the high frequencies that I don't know if that's where many new records are going these days.
So I have thoughts about this, but that's all they are thoughts. I don't know that I have anything close to an answer. But the things that have gone through my head, and we've done a few, like we did we did the two big Quiet Riot songs, Mental Health and oh my goodness, Come On Feel the Noise.
Yeah.
Matt loves telling the story that I started those mixes. I just kind of threw something together really quickly, but I was just trying to get a balance and make it feel good, but I wasn't listening really closely to the stereo version. Mm-hmm. And then after a couple hours, I said, Matt, why don't you sit down and, take a hack at it and see where we end up. He sits down and he hits play. And after about 10 minutes, he comes back into our lounge where I was hanging out, and he looked like he had just kicked my dog. He was like, Will, that mix sounded incredible. We're going to have to ruin it.
Oh, no, because
because it was all like they had cranked. I'm not kidding when I say I bet we had to crank between 6 and 9 dB of shelved top end into everything on that mix and take low end out. Now, knowing that and listening to, first of all, you got to think about everything that's a hit in that era, the early to through the mid 80s. For whatever reason, that sound, especially in rock music, is what hit. So everybody's listening to everybody else and going, oh, well, our thing doesn't sound like their thing, just like we do today. And then trying to do what the other person was doing. I'm just going to say it. There was a lot of cocaine in the studio. That affects your hearing. It affects the way you want. Now, it was landing with people, so who am I to say, one way or the other on that? And
it was getting delivered as playback on a vinyl record. By a DJ. And I feel like what I used to hear all the time when I was in the studio and we were working on tape is everybody was fighting to get the top end to sound good, right? That was the fight on tape. The low end sounded gorgeous, but the top end was a fight. And if, we're over biasing and we're doing all sorts of stuff to get that top end to sound good. And then when we get to digital, the top end is really easy, but the low end is the fight. Yeah.
And I wonder if that was the thing, like, oh, listen to our top end. Listen to the crazy top end we got on art, because that was a heavier lift back then, right? And so it was different than everybody else's thing. I also think it's, if you listen to stuff from the 70s that doesn't have that vibe, like everything is a reaction to everything else, I guess, is the long story short here.
Yeah. Well, and that's so true. And of course, like the low end thing in digital, getting the low end right. And also there's just a lot more room for low end. It seems like, you don't.
And that's the other thing. You had less available space for your frequency ranges in analog than you do in digital, especially digital now. Maybe not digital in, 1990, but certainly now.
Well, let's jump over and talk about, a record that I'm guessing it's a first time. It's not not something you had to recreate.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. Where is my note? You know what? I can't find. Oh, there it is. It's the one I highlighted. Do you ever do that where you put it away intentionally and then you can't find it at all? It's literally highlighted. Still right. So Aaron Rimbaud.
Aaron Rimbaud.
Rimbaud, excuse me.
Yeah.
The jazz piano trio album. That's one that you produced, engineers, and mixed in stereo and Atmos. So the full deal. We can ask you anything, man.
I was there from the very beginning, all the way to the bitter end.
It's a beautiful sounding record.
Oh,
really,
thank you.
really beautiful sounding record. Tell us about that project. Talk a little bit about, just tell us the story of that one. And then if you want to get into the details, I have lots of questions.
Oh, yeah, sure.
A record that sounds that wonderful.
I am happy to talk about that. So I met Aaron. I actually lived and worked in Nairobi, Kenya for the first 6 months of 2015 when I was working on Maisha Superstar, the singing contest show. I spent the first 3 months working on the TV show. And then the second 3 months, I was making a record with a Kenyan artist named Eric Wainaina, who's huge in Kenya. And Eric had been the music director on Maisha Superstar, so this all came together. Aaron, whose name I had heard in the ether through working with Eric, Aaron came in to do some session work on Eric's record. And I just had an immediate affinity for his playing. Aaron's an incredibly accomplished pianist. Jazz is his thing. And because he's born and raised in Kenya, he's got a different voice than, an American player might have. Aaron, I found out a few years later, I think it was 2018, he'd had a dream forever of moving to New York City, and he did. In 2018, he moved to New York, and he would come out to LA. He's got friends that live here regularly, and we'd get together and talk. And I had, in the meantime, I'd mastered a couple of records that he'd put out. And I think that he initially tossed the idea to me about doing like a solo piano album. And I said, let me put a little frosting on that, Aaron. How about instead of a solo piano album, we do a trio thing. So we'll keep it simple, but we'll get a couple of killing players. And I'm very lucky to be, I have my fingers in a lot of the jazz scene here in LA.
Yeah.
So I knew some absolutely amazing players.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. And you come from a background as a trombonist,
Yes.
You have an appreciation for that stuff. So
Yeah, I played jazz from my high school years up, and honestly, my record listening experience starts with me listening to my dad's old like Cannonball Adderley vinyl records and Dave Brubeck, and he had a collection of jazz records when I was a kid.
And Boston's such a great place for that too.
Yeah, and obviously Berkeley, heavy duty jazz there. So that's what we decided to do. And we had to do it on a very tight budget. Aaron was funding it mostly himself. We had no label at that point. And I said, it's going to be cheaper for you to come to LA to do this. I can get the players, I can get the studio. Then it's going to be for me to go to New York and us pay for a studio, whatever. So that's what we did. I hooked him up with an amazing drummer named Christian Human, who everybody would know as Jacob Collier's touring drummer, but it's like he's nominated for a Grammy this year on, I forget what record it is. And then we got put together with an incredible bassist named Aiden Carroll, who's also nominated for a Grammy this year, but for, I think he might be nominated on 2 things. But he's now mainly like a hip hop and R&B producer, but wildly talented bass player.
Yeah.
We did a day of rehearsal, and then we went into a studio called Dave's Room here in Los Angeles, which, to bring it full circle, was David Bianco's studio. That's the studio I helped David wire.
Ooh, so you knew a little bit about how to get things to sound good in there.
I know that studio inside and out. It is now run by another David, another good friend of David Bianco's, named David Spring, and his partner Paul Fig. They're the co-owners of Dave's Room now. But I know the place inside and out. It's not the cheapest studio in town, but it's not low budget in terms of the equipment. I knew it had a gorgeous sounding piano, and it had plenty of isolation to do what we needed to do. So we went in, we cut the whole record in a day.
Amazing. Yeah.
I knew that.
Now, what about let me back you up.
Stop me whenever you need.
I don't want to blow your completionism, but
no.
The 2 questions. One, first I want to ask you, when you say do the whole record in a day, but you brought in session players to join Aaron in this record.
Yeah.
So what's needed because some of us might think like, oh, that sounds like a blast, I want to do that one day. What do you need to know about putting together different musicians together for a session like that? You're going to do it in one day. Is 9 a.m. that morning the first time they meet each other and hear the music? No,
we did a rehearsal the day before.
The day before. Okay, great.
Yeah. So I knew Christian. I'd heard Christian play. I'd actually recorded Christian on a number of projects. I knew he was the right fit, right? That's kind of my gig producing this. So I can't tell Aaron anything about music that he doesn't already know. So that's not my job. My job is to kind of like a baseball manager, right? I can't control the tiny little details of the session, but I can put everybody in the best position for them to succeed. Yeah. And I knew that Christian was going to be able to add the color that Aaron needed for his music. And then Aiden, we had recommended to us, but I knew two people recommended Aiden to me. And I was like, if those two people say this is the guy for the gig, then I have to trust he's the guy for the gig. Right.
And would this be a situation where all the songs were written out on staff paper or charted for bass and drums, or is it all just head charts?
Aaron could have charted everything out, but didn't. My memory of and we recorded this in September of 2022. It came out just a couple of weeks ago, but it's a long time now.
Yeah.
My memory of the rehearsal is that that Christian and Aiden had heard the songs and knew roughly how they were going to go, but Aaron did not give them charts. So the three of them worked out what the final shapes of the arrangements were going to be in the different parts that, Aaron was like, well, I need to hear this thing out of the drums here and that thing out of the bass there. And once that stuff was laid down, then they just shaped the rest of it.
That's cool. That's cool.
But they're also, it's important to say, we are talking about some of the best musicians walking the face of the planet. Their ability to do this is next level.
Okay, so now what other aspects, you talked about isolation. What are things in a studio that are important when you want to do a jazz trio like this? Why do you want to isolate them or not isolate them? And if you do isolate them, do they need to be able to see each other? What's that need to be like to really work well?
Number one is they need to be able to see each other, right? This is all music, but this particular situation at a heightened level is communication, right? Yeah. And they just nailed the songs down 24 hours before. So they need to be able to make visual contact with one another so that they can cue each other. So Aaron can let them know, hey, this part's coming up next, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first thing. In terms of the isolation, Aaron and I talked a lot about the vibe we wanted for this record. And I said, as much as I admire the technical proficiency of modern jazz recording, I miss the vibe of those 50s, 60s, 70s records, that they didn't have the ability to isolate everything to the nth degree and tweeze it all until it was perfect. But there is an energy in those recordings that I miss.
Yeah.
And so we were going to try and capture things somewhere where we had the technical proficiency is clearly there, but we're making a choice to not make it perfect, right? So for me, the isolation was about, I want to be able to control the sound of the piano without like turning up. I don't want to turn up the drums and now have to turn the direct mic on the piano down to get the balance right. Like if we had everybody in a room together, that's what's happening, is you're managing bleed everywhere. Yeah. And some of those microphones on the drums are not the microphones I want capturing the piano. Now, we did have bleed on everything, but there were, the piano is in a booth. People can go to and see Dave's Room has a website. I think it's davesroom.net. And you can see the layout. And the piano is in a booth. So I could mic that booth. I can mic the piano in that booth. And then the drums were in the main space, and I can mic them up however I wanted. Then the bass had its own isolation booth as well.
And what would you say would be the distance visually from player to player so that it still feels close enough to see each other and get that immediate?
I think as long as they're comfortable with it, you're fine. I don't think there's a specific 10 feet is just about right. 8 feet is too close. 12 feet is too far away. It's can they accomplish what they need to accomplish as musicians in that situation is all that matters. And everybody had, Aiden was in an ISO booth with a window two windows where he could see Aaron and Christian. Aaron, the piano booth has just a big sliding glass door that opens up into the main space, so he could see the other two guys. So, there's good sight lines in that studio.
Right. And then when it comes to bass, this was upright bass on a lot of it, or it's all upright bass.
All
right?
upright. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because that is one of those things that until you get your first shot at trying to record an upright bass, you have no clue how hard it is to get that right. And so talk about some of the things that's really important about that. Is upright bass going to very often be an instrument we wish we had isolation on in a recording session?
I think that when we're talking about isolation, everything is dependent on situation, right? Sometimes you won't be able to do it. Sometimes you will. And until you sort of understand the mechanics of what's different about not having isolation versus having isolation, what do I lose? What do I gain? You're not going to know. And I think everybody's going to land in a different place on that. But certainly in a modern context, we tend to think more isolation is always better. And in this case, that's what I was going for. It wasn't the primary concern, but I knew I can put everybody in a booth. I can't go any further than that, right? That's the maximum amount I'm going to get. Right. So in terms of recording the upright, let's just say I over mic'd the bass, knowing that we were going to do this fast. I needed to capture everything. Once we got the takes that we liked, we were moving on. There was going to be no fiddling, and I wasn't going to be able to do a ton in the mix. So I did sort of the standard. I put a mic on the F hole of the bass. Is it an F hole on a bass? I can't remember.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
I also put a mic.
Big ass violin.
Yeah. I put a microphone sort of up on the fingerboard. So if I wanted more of the finger detail of his playing, I had a microphone for that. And then I actually had an NS10 speaker, like a sub, what you'd normally do for a sub kick. I did that behind the bass so that I had extra sort of natural low, sub frequencies there if I needed them.
That's badass, dude. And I could hear that in there, not knowing that that's what that was. There's a pillowy quality to the low end that is really big where it needs to be.
And I thought really hard about before we recorded, what is going to win? There's always a contest of who gets the sub frequencies. It's either going to be the kick drum or it's going to be the bass. You can't fit both down there, at least not without them clashing. And this is true in pretty much any kind of music. So my decision was the bass lives down there. And because the kick drum, we don't need, thumping EDM, hip hop, whatever kick. That's not what this is. The kick is a more detail oriented instrument in jazz. So
the kick in pop music, the kick is sort of a danceable backbeat. In jazz, it can become more of an accent.
Yes.
From the whole kit, right?
Yeah.
Like it might land.
It's just another drum. It's not serving the sort of, dance beat disco purpose anymore.
Yeah.
It's just another part of a kit.
For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s. And it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Szymczyk said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. Okay, cool, man. So let's, well, that's very cool. Thank you for explaining that. And I think one of the things that might help the rock stars when we talk about bleed and everything's different, sometimes that's a little frustrating because you're like, yeah, but I don't know. What does that mean? You know? And I think one of the things about understanding isolating an instrument like an upright bass or an acoustic guitar on a with a band situation is understanding that that instrument may need to have some pretty significant gain on the microphone in order to bring out those big round qualities, you know. And
so,
when there's bleed, the bleed gets exaggerated, especially when compression comes
I think here's a good way to look at it. If you're coming at it from a sort of, you haven't done 1,000 live recordings point of view, it is the trade-off between vibe and control. Okay. So if you're going to choose to record a bunch of people at the same time, chances are some of other people's instruments are going to end up in the microphone of the thing that it's closest to, right? So if you've got drums and acoustic guitar, even if they're in separate rooms, you're still going to get some in, right? No isolation is perfect. But the question you ask is, what's more important? Is it more important that this communication happens and that we capture the moment of all these people playing this together? Or, and this is just as reasonable, do you have an idea for, like, I want to really compress the hell out of this acoustic guitar. There's a sound I'm going for. And if I've got the bleed of drums in there, now I'm going to get that extra drum sound. Now that can work too. Like this is the thing. There's no right or wrong answer here, but definitely in modern recording where a lot of stuff tends to be samples or keyboards or, you know, where things are very much separate from one another, bleed is often viewed as a bad thing. But the thing is, sometimes when you listen to your favorite records, part of the sound you're hearing, part of the vibe that you love is actually the sound of somebody else's instruments in the drum microphones and going through all the treatment that the drums went through. And coming back to the Atmos thing, we have definitely worked on catalog records where we are chasing a reverb sound that we think is, you know, we're thinking in modern terms, we think, oh, somebody added reverb to this instrument, but that's not what happened. They put a reverb on the snare drum, but the guitar was bleeding into the snare. And now that reverb is also on the guitar.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
Right.
That's really fun.
It's complex now, you know, it didn't used to be because you didn't used to have a choice, but now you do. So yeah, that's, and same thing when you're recording a drum kit. I think I've definitely been in the studio where I've had people go, well, how come I can hear the snare drum and the kick drum microphone? And that takes me back at first because of course you do. And then okay, like, listen, you've been working with samples that are perfectly recorded one drum at a time. In the real world, there is no magic microphone that rejects everything except for the thing you pointed at. It picks up everything that's around it and you get some of everything. And how you balance that, how you manage that is a big part of how your recording is going to sound.
And then there's qualities that happen in a group recording like that with the bleed where, you know, everything just sort of lands just off from each other, but just so that you get this impact of a total sound that can be cool.
There's a chaos to it.
Yeah.
That, and riding that wave of chaos is part and parcel of the sound you end up with.
That's awesome. What a good quote. Riding that chaos It's part and parcel. Well, dude, it's great having you on the show here. We're definitely hitting our planned time, and you may have to go. So with that in mind, I'd love to invite you back another time where we keep diving in deeper into the jazz recording and everything, because I love that stuff. I'd love to keep talking about, micing up the drums, the piano, mixing it, then taking it to Atmos. So lots to talk about there. Rockstars, please do go listen to the playlists in the show notes. Go listen. If you want to go listen to the Spotify thing, that's fine. It's going to be stereo. If you want to hear the Atmos, which I highly recommend, go over to the Apple Music link and check out Will's work there. And make sure that you go into the settings and turn on the Atmos. and then
turn on sound check, because that's, as we were saying earlier, because the Atmos mixes are delivered so much quieter.
Yeah.
You want sound check. You want to be comparing apples to apples, because otherwise that stereo is going to sound loud and you're going to go, oh, well, this is better. But when you even them out, it's going to be a much closer contest.
Yeah. And then any other tip about how they can go hear it in Atmos? I mean, if they just pull it up on their speakers, they might not hear it. They might need headphones.
Unless you have an Atmos-enabled playback system at your house, like a Sonos ARC or Era 300, or Sennheiser has a soundbar. There's a bunch of options for listening to Atmos at home now. You don't listen to Atmos on a stereo set of speakers. That's why the stereo mix still exists. So if you don't have an Atmos-enabled playback system, then you're listening on headphones. That's perfectly reasonable.
Now, if you're on a mobile device, then you could use Apple AirPod Pros.
If you have, so there's a party trick that if you have Generation 3 AirPods or newer, AirPods Pro or AirPods Max, and there's a Beats headphone, Beats Fit Pro. If you have one of those 4 models, Apple can do an extra party trick that you can't do with standard headphones, which, by the way, you can listen to Atmos with any headphone on any service.
Oh, so even the old AirPods or earbuds or whatever they call them. Even the wired ones would work on an iPhone. You just have to turn it on.
What they can't do is something called head tracking. Now, most people will know this from, you just updated your iOS and you watch Netflix and turned your head and the sound stayed with your device as you turned your head and you go, what the heck just happened? Well, for Atmos, it's as if you're sitting in the room, and our center speaker is that one behind me. It's as if you're facing that speaker and you can turn your head and it's like you're moving. It's like you're turning around in my chair in the sound stage. It's pretty wild. It's not great when you're running.
Yeah. Well, so Rockstars, for those listening and not watching, Will's joining us from the Atmos mix room at Studio Delux, right?
Yes.
That's where you are. And so he's surrounded by speakers. His back is turned to the mix position, I think, right?
Yes. So that's our center speaker. Then you can't see them, but there are left and right speakers, and then left wide and right wide. There are 2 speakers on either side of me here, 2 behind me, 4 above me. And we actually, for this space, we have 2 subwoofers. One handles the low frequency effects channel, which if you've ever done surround mixing, you'll understand what that is. And then one is our bass management subwoofer for the whole array.
Oh, cool. And then what is how many speakers is that? And how do you describe, it's a number that you use to describe
this room would be 9.2.4.
Okay, great.
9 at head level, 2 subwoofers, 4 height speakers.
So takeaway, Rockstars, is just understand that you don't have to have all that stuff to be able to start enjoying Atmos.
No.
Just grab your headphones, plug them in, make sure that it's turned on with your device and you're going to hear it. And then if you have the fancier Apple stuff like you're talking about, Will, then as you turn your head, you'll hear the music sort of turn in perspective.
Yes.
I don't prefer that myself.
Most people don't.
Yeah. For music, for movie watching, it's a great experience.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of people, until you have the visual experience of, oh, this is what the speaker setup is, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
It feels like a random thing that's happening, and I totally get it.
Yeah. But I think that the future is bright. Speaking of bringing back the bright sounds of the 80s, the future is bright for us in listening. So Will, one closing question here. This is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Yeah.
You get to go back in time and you find young Will, who's maybe running around Nashville, at Ocean Way or something. And you say, listen, dude, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing that you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
It's all going to be okay.
It's all going to be all right.
Yep.
Awesome, man. Don't need to say much more than that. It's going to be okay. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for
to hang out
having
with
me.
you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And thanks for taking over the mix room to give us your time today and setting up the video and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
And then Rockstars, thank you for watching. Again, this is, I didn't really go into it at the beginning of this, but this is the new video podcast for Recording Studio Rockstars. So
am I the first one?
You're among the very
among
first.
the first. Okay.
Among the very
I'll
first.
take that.
Yeah.
All right.
And you might be the first one that I got it right. We'll just put it like that, hopefully, even though we had a few false starts. Give us a note in the comments. If you got any comments, please drop them below and let us know what you thought. If you have questions or if we talked about a specific thing anywhere during the interview, just go right to that place, put a comment in and the timestamp. We'll know where it was. And if you got questions for Will, put them in there and I'll, if Will doesn't see it, I'll be like, hey, Will, did you see this? And if he's got time, maybe he'll want to answer it. I don't know. We'll see.
I'll do my best.
All right, man, dude. Thanks for hanging with us, dude. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Lidge.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lidge Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.